My name is Gianluca Pirozzi. I'm the head of development, regulatory, and safety at Alexion. That's the AstraZeneca rare disease business unit. I'm a clinical immunologist by training. I've been in the pharma industry for over 23 years, and working specifically in the rare disease space for about 10. Prior to working, I've been in Alexion now for almost 5 years, 3 of them as part of AstraZeneca. And prior to that, I worked also in a rare disease company. It was actually, at that time, Genzyme, part of Sanofi. And prior to that, I spent most of my career in immunology and inflammation, and generally in the R&D, as well as clinical development, clinical operations, and safety. The ATTR cardiomyopathy, it's I would say a disorder characterized by the accumulation of defective proteins into the tissues in your body, but primarily in the heart, hence the word of cardiomyopathy. What does it mean, accumulation? So there's a protein called this transthyretin, which normally is in your blood to transport vitamin A and a thyroid hormone. And this protein tends to misfold and create the buildups in your body. So this is clumps of irregular proteins called deposits. This can happen in pretty much everywhere, but primarily in some area which are affected, which is the heart, but also the central nervous system, sometimes the kidneys. Now, this protein deposition in the heart, which are normal, tends to stiffen the heart, specifically the left ventricle. So the heart remains less functional, cannot pump the blood as it usually does. And so making it harder for your heart to work properly and pump the blood all over your body. And that leads to what is called a heart insufficiency, which is basically means that your heart is not working sufficiently enough to be able to pump the blood around the body and therefore be functional. There are 2 forms of this disease. So why this protein misfolds and create these deposits, the amyloid deposits? Well, there's 2 forms. One is hereditary, which means that it can be transmitted from a family, and it's due to a mutation of a gene, the TTR gene, which is the gene encoding specifically for the transthyretin, so this protein I was discussing before. So the protein, then it's abnormal, and that's why it misfolds and create the deposition. It's a genetic form and more frequent in the African American in the United States. The majority of the patients, though, they have what is called a wild type form, which means that there's nothing wrong in the gene. It's just a phenomenon of aging. We don't understand it very well, but we know that with age, so past 65 years old, some individual tends to accumulate this protein, and for some it becomes to the point that you develop the full disease, the ATTR cardiomyopathy. And as a matter of fact, this is currently the most frequent form of the disease. In terms of the symptoms, so since it's obviously a heart failure, you're going to have general symptoms of heart failure, so fatigue, inability to perform daily living, etc., to the point that you're going to have frequent cardiovascular hospitalizations, arrhythmias, and finally death. The process takes a few years, but generally when the patient becomes symptomatic, the disease is quite advanced already. And because of the generalized symptoms of heart failure, it's not an obvious to diagnose ATTR immediately. So it takes some time. It's generally done through imaging. So the ECG, you can do MRI, you can do PET scans. So those are specialized imaging that help with the diagnosis. And then you can also have a heart biopsies or muscle biopsy that will help you identify the deposition of the deposits in the heart muscle, and therefore have a fully diagnosis available for the patient. In terms of the epidemiology, that's considered to be a rare disease. Generally, we call rare disease everything which is less than 200,000 patients in the US. Currently, the diagnosed patients between US and Europe are estimated to be 114,000, but we do think that the disease is largely underdiagnosed, and now that it's more and more understood, and some medications become available. The numbers, the prevalence is going up because more and more diagnostic is happening, also through sophisticated IA technologies. We are diagnosing these patients more frequently. So the management of these patients are currently, we have one available medication that is currently being used, which is effective in this disease, which is considered to be the standard of care. So in addition to the general management of heart failure and blood pressure, we have the opportunity now to give a medicine called tafamidis, which is a stabilizer. So this medicine is, the brand name is Vyndaqel. And so this medicine is available. And what does the medicine do? It stabilizes the protein, which is responsible for the deposition of the amyloid in the heart and generally in the body. And therefore, it reduces further deposition. So this medicine has been now available for a few years, and it allowed to reduce number of cardiovascular hospitalizations in general, and also mortality over the years, with a reduction of 13% mortality over 5 years. So it's been quite effective in controlling the disease. That's the current management. Other medications can include also eplontersen and patisiran, and these are medications that generally also a number of medications tends to address the symptomatology behind the disease, but the medication which is really affecting specifically the underlying pathology currently approved is tafamidis. I mentioned to you that the currently available medication, the one is called stabilizer. So it means that you have the protein is creating the deposition and damage, and we're trying to avoid further deposition. However, currently, when a patient has deposits in the heart, those deposits do not go away. It takes a very long time for our body to recognize and clear those depositions. So one of the approaches that we developed at Alexion in collaboration with a biotech in Switzerland called Immune was to think about an antibody, which is a depleter. So what does it mean? The antibody specifically recognize the misfolded ATTR proteins. By recognizing them, it binds to the fibrils, then it activates the immune system, specifically the macrophages, which are cells which are specialized in recognizing pathogens or debris and clearing them out. So literally, they will chew and eat on the amyloid depositions and clear them from the tissues. So with this approach, we basically, in a way, to give you a visual, there's garbage in the street, that we clear up the garbage from the street. And this approach is given on top of medication like the tafamidis, which I mentioned before, which by stabilizing the protein avoids additional deposition of amyloid. So in other words, with tafamidis, we reduce the deposition of garbage, and with the depletion, we clear it out from the street. That's fundamentally the visual. So this is why the depleter antibody is a new approach that we have created. We believe it's very valuable because it can treat also the more severe segment of the patient population. In fact, we are enrolling in our study moderate to severe patients and general patients who are not necessarily included in studies with stabilizer or silencers. And the addition of this modality, we believe it's very valuable because to be able to treat this complex disease, you need a multimodality approach. So you need more than one way to tackle the disease to be able to manage the broad spectrum of the amyloid patient population. And that's why we are particularly excited about our program. Part of the excitement comes from the early data that came from this program. It was a phase 1b study. It was a fairly small set of patients, but this data showed, despite the small number of patients, a very significant impact on the deposition of amyloid by imaging. The data was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and we also saw trends of improvement of cardiac function as measured by some biomarkers of cardiac functions, which shows that there was an improvement overall on the function of the heart. The data was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and this data was strong enough to allow us to proceed directly to the next phase of development, which is our pivotal phase 3 studies, which we have started earlier this year. So we, after interaction with regulatory agencies, including the FDA and the EMA and PMDA, so the major regulatory bodies globally, we had an agreement that the phase 1b study was sufficient to proceed to the phase 3, as well as to select the appropriate dose of medication to give into the phase 3. The phase 1b was, in fact, a dose ascending study, and so we selected the dose and we went to phase 3. The phase 3 study now is enrolling. This will be a global study, pretty much in all geography globally, Americas, Europe, Asia, and it will enroll 1,000 patients with a randomization of 2:1. The primary endpoint of the study, so the primary evaluation, is the assessment of the composite endpoint of cardiovascular hospitalization, all-cause mortality, endpoints which are in alignment with the other endpoints used by other drugs currently in development, the silencer and the stabilizers, which I mentioned previously. The study is enrolling steadily, and we look forward to the readout. I think it's an important point to consider that our ability to tackle the disease through multiple angles, I think it's really important here. And in fact, if you in our broader AstraZeneca portfolio, we're doing that because we are thinking that on the one end, we have to focus on the ability to reduce the protein deposition through stabilization or silencing the gene. And in fact, we have another phase 3 program with a silencer, eplontersen, which was developed in collaboration with Ionis. This is a study which is currently ongoing. It's probably it is the largest study performed in ATTR amyloidosis. That one is enrolling 1,400 patients, including a spectrum of patients from class 1 all the way to class 3. And I'm referring to New York Heart Association, which is a way to classify the severity of these patients. That approach is using the silencing of the gene. So what does it mean? The ATTR protein can either be stabilized by the stabilized tafamidis, which is currently used as a standard of care. By another approach, which has been recently studied by a number of companies, is silencing this gene. So basically, through an RNA silencing, we block the production of the protein. By blocking the production of the protein, we block the deposition of the protein, and therefore we can prevent the damage associated to that. So we are currently, in summary, we have currently 2 phase 3 programs, one with a silencer and one with a complementary mechanism of action is the antibody depleter, as I was mentioning previously. Both of them are running in phase 3. We're going to read out from both of them. It's anticipated that the silencer will read out prior to the depleter, but this allows us to have a multimodality approach to the disease. And as I said, given the complexity, given the severity of the disease, it is important to be able to address the overarching spectrum of the patient by having at least 2 modalities, and most importantly, combining them as well. So our depleter antibody study is already on top of standard of care, which basically it's an add-on either to silencer or stabilizers. Another important point that I would like to mention is that for the ALXN2220, very recently, we received the fast track designation from the FDA, which is obviously very important. So for those who are not familiar with fast track designation, this is a process that the FDA uses to facilitate drug development, and most importantly, to expedite the review of drugs to treat serious condition when there is a need to fulfill a high unmet medical need. So basically, the purpose is to get important new drugs to the patient earlier. And why this is important? Because it gives you the opportunity as a company to have more frequent interaction with the FDA, more frequent meetings. If we have, for example, to discuss with the agency about an endpoint or about a biomarker to use in the clinical study, how to design the clinical study, etc., we can have a faster and a more direct access to the agency, which is very helpful for us. So the agency is helping companies that are developing promising therapies as well. In addition, the agency you become eligible for accelerated approval and priority review. Obviously, this depends depending on the criteria, if criteria are met, so depending on the data and the results of the phase 3 study. But this allows, obviously, to go faster in the review process and therefore bring this medication faster to the patients. So why the FDA attributed this designation to our depleter antibody, to the ALXN2220? Well, because they reviewed the early data, the phase 1b data that I mentioned previously with the imaging, and they considered that data to be strong enough and innovative enough to be considered breakthrough in a way, and therefore they gave us the fast track designation, which obviously we're very excited about. And thanks to that, we believe we can use that to further accelerate our plans and therefore bring this very novel medication to our patients as quick as possible.